Was the sentencing fair? Today we are going to review a Crown Court judge's sentencing remarks on a recent murder case, and we will compare it to another recent murder case to see if you think the sentencing was fair. If you're interested, let's get started. Hi everyone, I'm Karen Cole from Legal Minded Friends, and if you are new to my channel, I am a UK lawyer. I assist litigants in person, which means you represent yourself in court with my legal assistance and experience. And if you're going to represent yourself, you must be able to take emotion out of the equation and be able to evaluate evidence from a balanced perspective. So if you're not great at explaining stuff, then you should hire someone to speak for you. Because at Legal Minded Friends, we go through the evidence with you so you can explain it all to a judge in a balanced way. Most of my work is in civil court. However, I have assisted many people in the magistrate's court and in the Crown Court before a judge. And the difference is procedure, and the main difference is how the case is decided. The civil court is less formal and factors in a 51% probability, weighing up the evidence and testimony. In Crown Court, you can say nothing and let the evidence speak for itself, as there is a higher burden of proof. You have heard of the phrase innocent until proven guilty, which is Article 6 of our Human Rights Act 1988, which gives us the right to a fair and public trial or hearing in relation to both criminal and civil matters. Section 2 deals with the criminal offense, and everyone charged with a criminal offense shall be presumed innocent until proven guilty, according to law. For example, in Mexico, you are guilty until proven innocent. So just take note of that in case you decide to travel there. Okay, you may ask. So here we are in the UK. What are sentencing remarks? Well, they are the judge's comments whilst handing down a sentence, which is how long a person will be held in prison or what the punishment phase will be. They give us great insight to how future cases will be decided. As cases are decided in part with case law, because they set out a precedent where there is no legislation, or it will help to interpret legislation. And if you want to see how case law works, I've done a video on this. Check out the link below for a video I did on an employment tribunal case. However, in criminal cases, it is slightly different with the sentencing phase, and I'll explain this before ending our video today. The two cases I have chosen for us to look at are both knife crimes that resulted in death. The first case is in Manchester. I will tell you briefly what happened whilst going through the Crown Court judge's sentencing remarks. So let's begin. 3 lads in Manchester committed a horrific crime, resulting in a 16-year-old boy being murdered on the 9th of September 2021 for apparently no motive. The judge gave his sentencing remarks on the 27th of May 2022 in Manchester Crown Court. I will not name the offenders or the victim, though I will leave links in the description area if you want to know their names and the devastation this incident brought to their families and community. So the first offender was at the time a 19-year-old man who chased a 16-year-old boy who is the victim. Let's watch a clip released by the Manchester police. So what happened? The police footage captured a chase that took place, one male getting out of his car to run. Let's put this into context. The victim had been driving with other passengers after his first day of college. They passed the offender's car, and for some reasons unclear, the offenders thought the victim's car almost hit them. So they started pursuing the victim's car, dangerously driving through the streets to catch up with the victim's car. When they caught up to them, we hear what the judge reported happened next during the sentencing remarks of the first offender. So the three lads I will now refer to as three offenders who were sentenced by the judge as follows. So offender 1 did the stabbing, offender 2 drove the car, and offender 3 was carrying a knife. The judge remarked during passing of the sentencing of the first offender who murdered the victim by brutally stabbing him 4 times, the most fatal of which was the stab to the back of the victim's left thigh, severing an artery. He lost so much blood that this resulted in death. The judge remarked this happened in broad daylight, and even though the stab wounds were delivered with moderate force and were not aimed at the heart or neck, this sentencing is based on the intention to cause serious harm. The judge commented that after the stabbing, all 3 offenders fled the scene, and the murderer, the offender number 1, deliberately used a different name to call a taxi and then went on the run with thousands of pounds in cash and was arrested in October 2021. And for this offender, the judge used the starting point of 25 years. One of the aggravating factors was that the crime involved reckless driving and damage to other vehicles, frightening others on the streets. And then the offenders went on foot to chase the victim, which you will hear about in just a minute. The judge accepted there was no prior planning or intent to kill. So the judge sentenced offender number 1 to 24 years minimum term, which I will discuss what that means after we go through the sentencing of the other 2 co-accused offenders. Now, the next co-accused, this was the offender who was determined to be driving the vehicle. He was also 19 years old at the time of the murder. He chose not to give evidence at the trial, and the judge said that he did not hold this against him, saying it was his right not to give evidence, though the evidence found this offender to be the driver of the vehicle because DNA was found on the indicator control arm. So basically, he drove the car and helped others flee the scene. The judge said the starting point is also 25 years, and he sentenced offender number 2 to a minimum of 21 years. So what was offender number 3's involvement? Well, he was the one who seems to have started this incident. Offender 3 sat in the vehicle driven by offender number 2. And he had a long knife and held it up to the window of the vehicle that they were in, waving it at the victim's vehicle, who, again, to remind you, was a 16-year-old boy. This offender got out, so offender number 3 got out of his car, banishing the knife at the victim's car. This is why the victim drove off in the beginning, to get away from offender number 3's threatening behavior. Now, shockingly, offender number 3 was a 16-year-old boy at the time of the murder, and the mandatory sentence for a child found guilty of murder is at the magistrate's pleasure, meaning the court examines all the circumstances and can go beyond the minimum, as the minimum is the lowest possible starting point. The judge found after the victim smashed into another car, he jumped out and started to run on foot. Offenders 1 and 3 also jumped out of their car, running after the victim until they caught up with him as he ran out of breath. And the third offender passed his knife to the first offender, who obviously did the stabbing. So the judge commented that he, the third offender, got out of his car twice. The first time to banish the knife around, and the second time was to pass it to the killer. Or, even if it was taken from him, the judge felt that the third offender knew the knife would be used to cause serious harm. So the starting point for him, even though he was 16 years old, he decided was a minimum of 12 years. And because he started the operation to attack in full view of the public, this was an aggravating factor. The judge considered some of the mitigating factors, such as his background and history of domestic abuse, noting his father had spent time in prison and other traumas he had in his life. He had been assessed as developmentally, emotionally immature. Though he initially had some remorse, he denied any guilt and still had not accepted his role in the murder. The judge, as he did with offender number 1 and 2, told offender number 3 to stand before him, and he sentenced him to a minimum of 18 years in prison. So here we see the judge added 6 years to the minimum starting point, which tells us that the judge considered offender number 3's actions as serious as the other 2 offenders. I said I would explain the minimum sentencing, which means the amount of time that must be carried out in prison before an offender is eligible to approach the parole board for release. So it does not mean they will be released. It means after the minimum time has passed, then and only then can a parole board consider a release on license. So, what does this mean for the future of other sentencing cases of a similar nature going forward? Will they receive the same sentencing times? Well, yes and no. Criminal cases do not set precedent for the sentencing part of a case, as that phase is not law binding to do so in other criminal sentencing cases, because it is the punishment part which is at the discretion of the judge, interpreting the sentencing guidelines. So other judges do not have to follow suit. However, it must be noted judges' decisions are often a persuasive authority in other cases going forward. That's why it's confusing. I have done a video on persuasion if you'd like to check that out. The second case will be brief, as I only want you to consider, was the sentencing in our case with the offender number 3, remember he was 16 years old, had a knife, instigated a fight and a public danger, and ultimately gave his knife to another person who used it to kill someone. Was his sentencing fair compared to our second case for sentencing? This case happened in February 2022, involving another 16-year-old who actually committed 2 stabbings with a Rambo knife that resulted in 1 death. He was found guilty of murder. The Chester court, the Crown Court, sentenced this offender to a minimum of 19 years in prison. I have left a link below if you want to check that case out and read more detail. But before ending, my question to you is it fair that one 16-year-old who assisted but did not commit the murder got a minimum of 18 years and another 16-year-old who actually stabbed 2 people, killing 1, got a minimum of 19 years? Can you be objective, take away emotions, evaluate, and see if you can understand the reasoning behind both sentencing decisions? And as always, if you need legal help, contact legal-minded friends. Spread the word, as parents should be telling their children about these consequences and how the court will punish them. Thank you. Please like and share this video, as you never know who you could help.